What is next for Jake Miller? What does duct tape teach us about education technology? How should teachers be thinking about AI tools as they return to school this fall? Welcome back to another episode of the Teachers on Fire podcast, airing live on YouTube every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific and 11 a.m. Eastern. My name is Tim Cavey, and my mission here is to warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your professional practice. Today's Teacher on Fire is Jake Miller. Jake is an accomplished educator, speaker, presenter, podcaster, and author. This fall, he enters his third year as a personalized learning specialist in Ohio. You can connect with Jake on LinkedIn, on X, Instagram, and YouTube at Jake Miller EDU, on his podcast, Educational Duct Tape, at his website, jakemiller.net, and in his book, Educational Duct Tape, and EdTech Integration Mindset. Jake, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Are you, sir, ready to light it up?
Oh, I told you before we started, Tim, born ready. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be back on Teachers on Fire. Thanks for having me.
Dude, so good to hear your voice again and see you around. I know you haven't been completely silent, but I'm really looking forward to catching up and hearing what you're into this fall.
Yeah.
So Jake, let's start here. You are a truly loved voice in K-12 education, and you earned a committed following as a content creator during what I call the golden years of teacher Twitter, as I'm sure you will resonate with, right? The golden years. Thinking back to the teacher chats and the Twitter chats rather, and the edu-GIFs and everything else that sort of came to symbolize that period. So what a great time to be on Twitter and to connect and build networks. You've got such a large following, continue to have one. So if you could, I'm sure I'm not the only one sort of looking for a recap, Jake. Could you summarize the ups, downs, and pivots from your last 5 years, and where are you now?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for that. I don't know about a truly loved voice. I think I'm just a positively tolerated voice, maybe, or something like that. I don't know. And I do miss those golden years of Twitter. I mean, how exciting was like 2017 to 2019 on Twitter. We were all just like loving, sharing, and learning from each other. And then our worlds and education kind of went crazy. And so did mine. So the last 5 years, like you asked that question, I'm like, oh man, the last 5 years, I have done so many different things in this ride. So 5 years ago, I was kind of riding that teacher Twitter, golden years of teacher Twitter and EdTech wave. I was presenting, I was podcasting the Educational Duct Tape podcast, having a blast. And I was preparing to really devote the majority of my work time to that stuff, to traveling and speaking and virtual stuff and things to support teachers with educational technology. And then obviously the pandemic happened. So in 2020, I really had to change my focus to just kind of supporting educators and then supporting my family through those times too. And had to really refocus in my work and my day job. At that same time, unfortunately, my position at my school as a technology integration specialist was eliminated, and I had to switch back into the classroom, which was good in some ways. And I love teaching. I love supporting teachers more than I love being in the classroom. I believe that's where I belong, is helping the teachers. So that was a tough change for me, but not a negative. It helped reframe, the way I work with teachers and my knowledge of what's happening in the classroom by going back into the classroom instead of being in a tech coach role. But and I experienced all of the virtual teaching and the concurrent teaching, and half the kids there and half the kids not, all of those different formats during those years. And during that time, I was also putting the finishing touches on my book, Educational Duct Tape, which released in, I think it was 2021. And then after that came out, I shifted away from the Educational Duct Tape podcast. I felt like I needed to try something new. Shifted into doing a show called the EdTech News Brief, to keep educators up to date on all of the changes and educational technology. And then I have to be honest, I got a little bit tired of doing that when all I was talking about was artificial intelligence. Like, I just felt like I was talking about new AI tools every episode. And I was like, I need a break from this. Like, as exciting and exhilarating as it all is, it just was a shift that I wasn't ready for. But at the same time, I shifted in my day job into a role as a personalized learning specialist, as you mentioned in the intro there. And I think it's pretty much the best thing that's ever happened to me professionally. I found that's what I want education to look like. That's what I want to support educators in doing. It really just lit that fire for me. And I had this new passion that I didn't even know was in there. Like there were some teaching strategies in there that I used and some things that I already believed, but it wasn't kind of on the surface. And then the more I learned about personalized learning, the more I thought like, this is what I want to happen. So my focus really shifted to that. And now I'm preparing to bring back, well, I'm preparing, it's happening, bringing back the Educational Duct Tape podcast to help educators this school year with educational technology. And I think shifting as we go more towards personalized learning. You mentioned my social media username in the intro there. It used to be Jake Miller Tech everywhere. And now I've changed it over to Jake Miller EDU everywhere. I still want to support them with that ed tech, but I don't want the tech to be the only thing. It's the education, and the tech is the tool. It's what I talk about. So why would my name say just tech instead of EDU?
Yeah, I like that pivot. And I think about a lot of our content creator friends who sort of established brands around EdTech in an age when EdTech was everything. And we've sort of, I agree, I think we've started to transition our focus a little bit. Technology is still every bit as important, but we're seeing it maybe a little bit differently, a little bit of a different perspective. Want to take a moment to give a shout out to a mutual friend here. Brian Carpenter says, "Good morning, Tim and Jake. Coming to you from Abbotsford." And Brian agrees with my characterization here. Truly loved and appreciated. So thank you so much, Brian, for joining us this morning. It's good to have you on board. So Jake, apologies if I missed it, but let me just get some clarity too on what are your plans for both the podcast and YouTube. And wow, do I resonate with the sustainability piece of that. So it doesn't sound like you're going back to the weekly news brief, but what are your thoughts about creating on YouTube and on the podcast for this coming year? What's a pace that you feel like might be sustainable for both?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is the sustainable part. And I think I've come to realize over the years that I'll set these goals for what my pace is going to be, and then I'll go, you know what, that wasn't realistic, and then I'll shift and I'll change things. And I think that's important in the classroom too, to give ourselves that grace to shift things when we realize that maybe our goals were too lofty or the pacing we had was too, I don't know, extreme or whatever it might be. So, but yeah, Educational Duct Tape podcast is back. My plan is to air one weekly. I'm also a father of 3, so who knows if I'll air one weekly, right? But that's the plan. And the plan is it'll rotate between an episode in the normal format that I always used, which is with a guest interview around a certain question about educational technology, followed a week later with the same topic, an episode of just listeners, the duct tapers, I call them, sharing their responses to what we talked about the previous week. So next week, my good friend Molly is going to be on the podcast. I can share a little bit more about that later in the talk here. And we're going to talk about something related to artificial intelligence. And she shares some amazing things. We already recorded the episode. She shares some great stuff. Amazing. People are going to learn so much from her. But I know some people are going to go like, oh, but what about this? Right? I have this other idea, or, ooh, I've heard of that thing she mentioned, but the way I like to use it is this way. So I'm going to give them that space to share that. And then that'll happen in the following week's episode, where it'll just be audio from the listeners and myself reacting to it. So it's going to be a 2-week cycle. And then as far as YouTube, my plan is to put the soapbox moments that I record. It's just a talk from me sharing kind of a metaphor and an idea and a mindset related to ed tech or education. Those will go up on YouTube. That's currently the plan, as well as on all the vertical video formats too, the TikToks and the Reels and things like that too.
Yeah, they're well suited for that. And I look forward to seeing what the soapbox looks like, Jay, because I always hear it on the episode. No, I'm guessing those soapbox moments, will they be audio only on YouTube, or will you sort of look right in camera?
Oh, looking right in camera. It's this camera right here.
Good.
I actually, this in this new iteration of the show, I'm using Descript to record. I don't know if you've used Descript before. It has AI assisted editor where it takes your speech and turns it into a script. It transcribes it all, and then you could edit it based on the script. I could take out a word here and there and things like that, right? Like, and remove. Oh, I didn't mean to say that. I could just remove it from the script. It pulls it right out of the audio. It pulls it out of the video as well. And then so I'm going to take those videos and upload them. So I actually just putting the finishing touches on the one from this past week's episode. So it'll be up on YouTube, not long after this chat is over. I'll pop that up there. So yeah, video with some I don't know, little embellishments within the video and stuff like that. But it's the same exact recording. I was looking at a camera the whole time. So it's ready.
Well, it's great. I love your plans, love your renewed energy, Jake, and I can't wait to see what comes of the interactive features that you're introducing to the podcast. And I checked out the Padlet, didn't have a chance to record anything yesterday, but Brian, if you're still with us, let's record something and get on Jake's next episode. But I'll extend that to all of our listeners, of course. Go ahead and first of all, make sure you're subscribed to Jake's Duct Tape podcast, and then secondly, go ahead over to the Padlet and record some feedback. Jake, I don't want to belabor this point, but I'm thinking about the possibilities there at Padlet. And my interest is in YouTube, as you know, and I'm wondering if I could ever do something similar in terms of video replies and sort of assembling those. I think your mind is focused on the audio. Let's get that going first, but I'm just curious to see where else that could go. On a related note, we've always looked for more interaction with our listeners here in the podcast space, thinking particularly of the audio-only audience. And Spotify recently introduced the opportunity to leave comments on episodes, which I think is really interesting. So I haven't even mentioned that on the show yet. But if you are listening on Spotify, go ahead and drop us a comment right now. Let us know you heard this conversation. Brian says, be like the buffalo with the AI storm. And yes, absolutely. Someone listened to Jake's last episode, and we'll come back to that here in a couple of moments. But first, I want to talk about your book, Jake, Educational Duct Tape and EdTech Integration Mindset. What's your message to that educator who feels frustrated or overwhelmed by the EdTech landscape?
It's interesting because that metaphor came in an age where educators' perspective on EdTech was a little bit different, because I started talking about educational duct tape in I think it was 2018. And so obviously the EdTech landscape was different then. We didn't have all the AI. We didn't have remote teaching. We didn't have trying to teach virtually. We didn't have all the stuff that came from the pandemic. And it was just about educators feeling afraid to adopt technology. And I think now we've shifted to educators feeling kind of wary of new technologies, right? But the mindset has always been about look, you don't have to do it all. You don't have to use all of the things. Like you mentioned Padlet. It's one of my favorite EdTech tools out there. But you don't have to use Padlet unless it meets a need or addresses a goal that you have. So for example, this year, a lot of educators are going to go I used to use Flip, or otherwise previously known as Flipgrid. I used to use Flip and I absolutely loved it, but it's gone now. Sorry if anybody didn't know that yet. It's gone. I don't know if it's officially gone now or the end of this month or something like that. By the time school starts, it's gone. The tool's been moved into Microsoft. So it's kind of in there if you're a Microsoft user, but otherwise it's gone. And they're going what do I do? Right. So now you have a specific need. You had these video conversations happening there. You need to replace that because that was a powerful part of your classroom. I'm assuming. Padlet actually is a good tool for that. So Padlet maybe is something that you should be looking into because it addresses addresses a need or a goal that you have. So educational duct tape is thinking about the tool, the EdTech tool, like we think about regular tools, like we think about duct tape, right? We don't use duct tape unless we need it for something, unless it addresses a goal for us. So I think if you're feeling frustrated or overwhelmed, you need to just block out the things that you don't need. So my thought always relating to the tools is when I walk into Home Depot or Lowe's or any hardware store, I'm not a particularly handy guy. Figure out how to fix the stuff around my house that needs fixed. I'll watch a YouTube video. I'll figure it out. But I'm not the kind of guy who's outside I don't know, building, who knows, doing some amazing structures and architecture and who knows. I'm not a craftsman. But I could fix what I need to fix by watching some videos on it. But when I go into Home Depot or Lowe's, I'm kind of overwhelmed by all of that, right? And so the mindset when you go in there is I don't need to look at any of those things. I'm here to fix this thing. I've got this leaky pipe. I'm going to go to aisle 13. That's where the plumbing is. I'm going to get the pipe. I'm going to get the putty that goes around it to fix the leak, whatever it is that you need. That's the only thing you're looking at. Ignore the whole rest of the store. And so I think that's the thing we need to think about with EdTech. Be aware of what else is out there. Like, I know that aisle 12, those are drills. Like, yeah, great. I don't need a drill right now. I know what it is. I just don't need it, right? I need the plumbing aisle right now. So thinking about what you need, what you're trying to address, and addressing it one thing at a time. There's probably 5 things I need to fix on my house, but right now the leaky pipe is the one that's urgent. And so that's what I'm going to focus on, right? So you don't need to think about all of it. Just think about one thing that is gonna support you and support your learners and lead to good things happening in your classroom.
I love that. And I know you have a great phrase that you repeat on the pod that is escaping me just now, but it's about addressing a particular learning goal, right?
Yeah.
So it's learning goal first, and then the tool supports that. And I think that's the mindset to keep in mind. And it certainly helps that overwhelm as well. It just simplifies things and gives teachers a focus. Well, on a related theme, let's talk about AI, because as we discussed off air, wow, has AI really sort of come on like a blizzard in the last couple of years. How should teachers be thinking about AI tools as they head back to the classroom this fall, Jake?
I think we have to be aware of them, right? We can't stick our heads in the sand about it, which I recently learned ostriches actually don't do. That's a myth. I didn't know.
What?
Right? Who knew? So ostriches don't do that. But we can't just stick our head in the sand. We got to be aware of it. We got to think about what's out there. But that doesn't mean that we have to use all of the things, right? We have to use some of it. I think we have to adapt to and utilize some of it. We don't have to do all of the things. Like, if you're using ChatGPT and that's it, but you're aware of the other stuff going on, great. If you're using Gemini, or you're using Claude, or you're using Magic School, or you're using Diffit, or whatever it is you're using, great. You don't have to use the other things. Be aware of them. Try some things out. Go along with this, right? And talk to your learners about it, I think, is the most important thing, because they need somebody modeling the appropriate use of these things. They need to understand from us where we use it and where we don't use it. What are our boundaries? Where can AI help us be more effective at our work? And what's too far, right? Or where's it bad, or where's it, inappropriate to use AI for it? So we need to be aware. We need to try some things out. We don't need to try them all out. I think we need to talk to our learners about it. In that most recent episode of the podcast that Brian, actually, good morning, Brian, that Brian referred to there with the Be Like the Buffalo, the AI storm, I talked about we want to run towards this AI storm. We don't want to try to run away from it. We want to run towards it. We want to think about it. We want to address it. We want to be open to it. And I gave a list of 6 steps that we could take in there. The first of which is just being aware and informing yourself, educating yourself about what's out there. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert. It means you have to be aware of it. And then there's some other steps of how we start to, develop policies, develop those guardrails, talk to your kids about it, right? Have discussions like, what are some things, how should we use this in the classroom and how should we not? Have those discussions with learners. But yeah, we can't just avoid it because it's here and it's going to change the way we do things for sure.
I love that metaphor of the buffalo versus the cows. And if you're a little bit mystified by those metaphors, go ahead and tune into the Jake's most recent podcast episode. But I like what you said there, Jake, about relating to learners, our rationale for choosing these different tools. And I think particularly at the middle years and up, maybe intermediate years and up, I think why not loop students in to let them know exactly why you're choosing this tool and use that learning language, the language of learning, to let them know how it supports the learning goal. On August 14th, you will be presenting at FETC's Back to School EdTech Tools webinar. That's very exciting. Tell us about the 8 tools, if you can. I don't know if that's classified information, but I'd love to hear your list of 8 tools that you believe you and your fellow panelists believe that teachers should know about. And of course, let us know, how can we virtually attend? Where do we sign up?
Yeah, so I was honored when Jennifer Womble, who is the chair of FETC, reached out to me and invited me to be a part of it. It's me and Holly Clark and Stephanie Jacobs and Kim Zajac, and we each get to share 2 different tools. And it was kind of nice. We had an email thread where we said, like, let's all pick our tools so that we don't we don't want to overlap, and we want to get a good cross section of what's out there, what's excited. And there was like no arguments, no fist fights over who got which tools. We got 8 really good tools without having to argue about it. So yeah, we touch on Adobe Express and Canva, very similar tools, but it's nice seeing about both of them, kind of hearing a comparison. There's some talk about Gemini, which is kind of nice that we actually don't talk about Chat GPT on there. Not that it's bad. I think it's just familiar. And so hearing about Gemini, which is a similar tool just from Google. Book Creator, fantastic tool. Diffit, which is a AI tool for differentiation of resources. It does some really impressive stuff. It's a really cool tool. Magic School, and one called Suno, which Suno, which records audio, turns text into audio in a certain voice, records songs and things like that too. And then the one I mentioned earlier, which is Padlet, which I think is a really good replacement for Flip, as well as for Jamboard, which are both going away. It's a potential replacement for both of them. You could probably guess that's one of the two that I talk about because I'm excited about the potential of it. I've always loved it, but I think now it's especially pertinent as we try to replace those tools. And I don't know exactly how to get to it. If you Google FETC, I've been tweeting it out. That's how. Go to X, find Jake Miller EDU, and I tweet it out regularly. But yeah, you can register. It's on August 14th. It's free. And join us for the webinar to hear about those different things. And it'll be recorded too. If you happen to miss it, just register so that you'll get an email of that recording, and it goes up on their YouTube too.
Well, that's an awesome list, and look forward. I hope that day works for me. I'd love to be a part of that event. Thank you for joining us, Teachers on Fire. If you're getting value from this conversation on the video format, give this video a like. Jake, how can EdTech tools help teachers offer voice, choice, and personalized learning to their students without burning out? And as a little bit of context there, I'm thinking not only about your current position in schools, but I'm also thinking about a theory that I have that with all of the UDL and the great philosophies that are out there about meeting the needs of every single learner in the classroom, it's wonderful. It's a great time to be any kind of neurodivergent learner at all. But on the other hand, I think it's one more tax on teacher energy. Can EdTech tools be a part of that solution?
Yeah, certainly. And I think the first thing, before we talk about the EdTech tools, I think I understand and I hear the fear of burning out while trying to implement some of these maybe new strategies to you or new practices. But the nice thing is when we implement these things, it does the opposite of causing us to burn out. It does. We are required to put in a little bit of work to do it, but educators find that they enjoy their job more. As kids have choice, as kids have voice, as kids are having their needs met, kids get more motivated, kids get more excited. We feel good about the things that are happening, and our classrooms become more positive spaces. Not immediately, it's not a click of the fingers, but as we transition into this kind of model, our classrooms become happier places. So the likelihood of burning out isn't really there. We're putting a lot of work to do it. There's a study referenced by Alfie Kohn. I'm sure you've probably heard of Alfie Kohn, famous author for decades, talking about education and parenting and things like that. And he talks about this study done actually on employees at the, I don't know, some workplace. And they found that the most likely cause of burnout wasn't too much work. It wasn't too little pay. It was a lack of, and I'm not directly quoting this, but there was a lack of autonomy, a lack of power over what they're doing. So what caused employees to work out wasn't too long of hours or too much of work or working too hard or not being paid enough for it. It was not having control over what we're doing. Right. And I think that's true. That wasn't an education study. It wasn't done in a class or in a school, but I think teachers, that rings true, right? We're not feeling burnt out when we're going crazy in August or whenever the beginning of your school year is getting ready. We're only feeling burnt out if the school is telling us what to teach and what to do and how to do it, right? It's not the putting the bulletin boards up that burns people out. They love doing it. They're designing their own bulletin board. They're feeling psyched about what their bulletin board looks like, or whatever it might be, whatever your jam is in education. The thing that makes us feel burnt out is when it's being dictated towards us and we're being told exactly how to do things. That's what burns us out. And that's what happens to kids too, right? They get burnt out when they're being told exactly how to do things in lockstep and don't have voice or choice over it. So I think it's important. So how can ed tech help with that? I think those are the correct two things to start with personalized learning, or maybe three. You mentioned UDL. UDL is huge in personalized learning. I think when we're talking about giving kids choice, that means we need to have different options available to them, right? And that is universal design for learning. That's having multiple options available, and ed tech does that so well, right? We could say you could type, you could record, you could do this, you could do that. And so we look at all the different tools that are out there. I mentioned a couple in that relating to that webinar earlier. I mentioned Book Creator, Canva, and Adobe Spark and Padlet. And each of those lets kids express themselves in different ways: voice, video, text, typing, pictures, drawing, right? So many different options for how they can express themselves. So that's huge, right? And then I also mentioned tools like Diffit, which differentiates. So I could take an article and put it at different reading levels. I could put it in different languages. I could have an activity that's a reading activity, but say, like, I'm going to make one reading passage that's about Taylor Swift, one that's about LeBron James, one that's about the Olympics, one that's about Katie Ledecky, one that's about Kamala Harris, one that's about Donald Trump, whoever it might be. And I can make all of these different reading activities for people to read, or for the kids to read, and do it pretty quickly because AI helps me do that, right? And I've now done UDL. I've given my kids some choice, right? And the voice normally comes a little bit later. To me, the difference between we tend to lump the two together, voice and choice. To me, choice is ordering from the restaurant's menu. Voice is asking for something that's not on the menu, right? Voice is going like, "Hey, I see you've got these ingredients. Can you make me this?" Right? So voice is actually advocating for something other than what's on the menu. So we've kind of got to start with choice to start to give them that agency, help them build the power to advocate for themselves, the knowledge of what might work really well for them. And like I said, ed tech is really good for that because it builds our repertoire of options. And with AI, we could do that pretty quickly. As long as we're making sure the stuff that we're making is quality, we could do that pretty quickly using the AI. Yeah, sorry, there was a lot there.
No, that was great. That was absolute gold. Thank you so much, Jake. I want to move to this question, and this relates to sort of a way that you approach everything you do. And listeners of the podcast will know that you love to engage your guests in games and laughter. And I thought seriously about you and I exchanging dad jokes for a few minutes to start off the show to see who could make the other start laughing first. But talk about this value. I would consider it one of your core values, fun and laughter. Why is that so important in our buildings and in the work that we do?
So I've got to say, you mentioned us reading dad jokes to each other, trying to get each other to laugh. Have you ever seen the TikTok videos where they do that? They'll read them back and forth to each other.
Yeah, his name is Riley something. Yeah, or Logan Isle. I think it's Logan Isle. That's exactly who I was thinking of. Yeah, with the cups of coffee on the dock.
Yes. Yep. They give me every time. I laugh at all of them because I love dad jokes.
Oh my gosh.
So you would tell one and I would be laughing already.
That was going to be my source, Jake. If we did this, that was going to be my source. So you would already know them.
I've seen these all. And I still laugh at them. I think it's funny because bringing fun and laughter into the way I present or the way I talk on the podcast or anything like that, or the way I wrote the book, it's deliberate, it's intentional, but also it's just bringing myself to the work. Like, this is just how I operate. This is what I'm always like. So I'm just showing up as me. I'm not really going like the best way to podcast is to be funny. I'm going like, this is just me. I'm just going to be Jake, right? And that's the way I do it. And I think Brian's comment right down here was so appropriate. Fun and laughter is important for building rapport and trust in relationships. It's something in our brains and maybe in our hearts that makes that happen. When the fun and laughter happens, that builds that trust. It humanizes us, right? We want our classrooms to be human centered. We want it to be about us and our learners, not about our content. Right? We want it to be about us and our learners, not about our content. We want it to be human centered. And one of the greatest way to do that is to laugh, is to smile. I'm sure there's brain science that says it releases certain chemicals in our brains that builds that trust and primes us for learning. But it's simply put, it creates bonds between us and our learners. It creates joy between us and our learners. And studies have shown it relieves stress. And so when I'm talking to teachers, which is my main audience, is teachers, not students, number one, I want to create that joy for them because they deserve it. Number two, I want to create those bonds and that trust because I want them to trust that I'm there to support them. But even the bigger part is I want to relieve stress for them, right? I want the stress to go away. So I want two things to happen. I want them to not be stressed, and I want
Mhm.
them to learn and get better because that's what they want. They want to keep getting better and better and better at what they do in their classroom. Um, but you can't do that if you're all stressed. We think about the Maslow and stuff like that. We've got to get beyond that stuff before anything could happen, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think that we talked about burnout in the last question there, and I think that's part of the picture, right? It's not always, and I'm speaking to administrators here, I suppose, but it's not always about reducing teacher workload. It's also about bringing more joy and laughter into our buildings. And I love what you said about just reducing the stress, bringing down that tension level, and
Mhm.
allowing sort of humanizing the work. So something I'm thinking about, Jake, is how to bring more laughter into my building this year. And I don't have the solution just yet, but I'm working on it. I'll keep you posted. If
Yeah.
you're enjoying this conversation, teachers, consider adding the Teachers on Fire YouTube channel to your morning commute. Start your day on fire. I know more people like myself are starting to use YouTube as their go-to for content like this. But if you are still one of the audio only listeners on Apple Podcasts or another podcast app, that works as well. Jake, outside of education, what's another area of learning for you? I know you're a curious guy, you're a lifelong learner, defined. So, what is it that ignites your passions away from professional learning and brings you alive as a human being?
Yeah. Well, so I really do a lot of professional learning at home. I'm a little bit of a nerd like that. Like I have a stack of books behind me that are books about personalized learning and other things that are kind of connected to personalized learning. So I spend a lot of time reading that stuff. I get in my comfy chair up in my room in the corner, the recliner, and I read a lot of books about stuff like that. And I love it. But that's not the question. You said away from professional learning,
Yeah.
right? That's what I want. That's what I want to learn about. I think the other thing that I've found most recently that I've enjoyed learning about the most is so I have three kids, as I mentioned earlier. My two boys are both involved in basketball, and I've always been both of their rec basketball coaches. And as Parks and Recreation, I should say, basketball coaches. And as they've gotten older, it's gotten more challenging, right? I'm not just teaching the kids how to dribble and shoot. I'm teaching them how to uh, play against the zone defense and break a press and strategy, all these different strategies. So every year they get older, the game gets more challenging, and I keep learning. Like I'm watching videos, I'm thinking things through. Like after practices, I'm sitting there like scratching the bottom of my beard, thinking about like, how do I do this stuff? And I found like this is really fun. It's really fun learning about this stuff and trying to game plan for that. Now, like when the season ended, I was like, oh, I'll miss it. And my wife's like, "You're gonna miss the kids." I'm like, "No, I mean, like, a little bit, but mostly I'm gonna miss like the learning and the thinking about this stuff. It's been really fun to do."
That's so cool. Share about a personal habit or a productivity hack, Jake, that contributes to your success, keeps your fire burning, and allows you to do everything you do.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with the personal habit one, and that's that when I'm at home, there's no email for me, like no
Hmm.
work email,
Okay.
no, and so it actually you could say maybe it makes me a little less productive because I'm not spending, all 15 waking hours looking at my email. Um, because like that's some time that I'm losing there. But I think it actually in the long run makes me more productive because when I show up to do the work, I'm energized and ready to do the work. Right. So yeah, once I get home, the email is off unless I'm working from home. That's different. But like once I'm in dad mode, the email's off. I'm not checking the email. And then I mentioned my comfy chair earlier. I go to my comfy chair for about a half an hour every day and read a book. And oftentimes it's a learning related book, about my work. But that is energizing for me to just go there, kick back, read a book, like block, like not look at a screen, block things out, be calm and read. So I think the hack there, the habit, number one is the disconnecting from work, and number two is the finding what that energizing thing for you is. For me, it's relaxing and reading a book. For other people, it might be going for a bike ride or going for a run or throwing the ball with a kid or doing a puzzle or whatever it might be. Finding what that thing is that's an energizer for you.
Jake, I love to ask my guests about one tool that they enjoy using somewhere in their professional practice. We talked about a great list of all stars earlier. Is there one in particular that you are focused on learning more about right now?
I don't know if so. One that I'm using a lot is Padlet. I'm I'm using it because for the podcast stuff, as we mentioned earlier, people could record videos, could record audio. I could download them. I could put them in the thing. I use it as an organizational tool for myself too, to plan out episodes and things like that. I use it for professional developments I lead. So that's what I'm using a lot. What I'm learning about a lot are just the AI tools. I just keep picking new ones to learn about. Lately, it's been Diffit, as I mentioned earlier. I've got to dive back into Magic School to learn more about some of the things they've added. School AI is one I'm excited about right now that I don't know a whole lot about. So that's one that I'm going to be diving into pretty soon. But I just you got to be aware of these things, you know.
I saw a tweet or a post from Magic School, I think yesterday, saying they now have a professional development creator and it will create a plan of professional development for your school. I thought, wow, that's audacious. That's a that's a bold claim, because PD and professional learning are sort of sacred spaces, and people have a lot of strong opinions from different corners. So if they're going to, anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, but recommend a book, one that you've been reading lately, or perhaps one of your all-time faves that was deeply influential for your growth and learning in some way.
I'm going to do both. My all-time fave is Drive by Daniel Pink, all-time favorite book. The one I'm reading right now is called Never Enough. I want to say the author is Jennifer Brehany Wallace. I don't know how to pronounce the second part of her name there. But it's about achievement culture in high schools mostly, and the pitfalls of it. I'm about halfway through it. It's a fascinating book and a great read. Highly recommend it. Have you heard of that one before, Tim?
No, I'm not sure that I have.
Never Enough. Right. Yeah, you're gonna write that one down.
Okay. All right. Thanks. And thank you, Danelle, for giving this video a like on Facebook. We appreciate you joining us this morning. Jake, tell us about someone that we should follow on Education X, Instagram, LinkedIn, or we mentioned TikTok, and share why they've been inspiring you lately.
Yeah. So one of my good friends who I mentioned earlier, she's actually the guest in this week's episode of Educational Duct Tape, is Molly Klodor. It's at Mrs. Klodor. That's Klodor, at Mrs. Klodor. She's not on X anymore, but she is on Instagram and she is on Threads. You can connect with her there. Reason I love talking to and listening to and hearing from Molly, she is a tech coach at the school that she works at here in Ohio. And she has been her whole school system, but her especially, have really spearheaded utilizing AI appropriately in their schools, developing policies, to developing guidelines and guardrails for how it can be used, and then supporting kids and teachers in using it and not hiding from it. So it's used a lot. So I love hearing from her, because she's a realist about this stuff. You know, she was a classroom teacher for, like me, for, you know, more than a decade. I'm not sure how many years in the classroom prior to being a coach. But she understands the dangers of using AI, but she also understands the potential. So very mindful thought about how do we use it? How do we not use it? What are the good things? Where does it benefit us? Where do we maybe want to stay away from it? How do we develop guidelines for it? So she's a person I have loved learning about AI implementation from.
Jake, I love asking this question of fellow podcasters. As a support to my work here at Teachers on Fire, who is one educator that you would recommend I interview next on the Teachers on Fire podcast?
I think you need to reach out to Molly. She's amazing. I think it needs to be Molly. Okay. I also, I just spoke to Dan Fitzpatrick too for the podcast. Dan is the author of The AI Educator, I believe is the name of his AI book. And he was fantastic as well. And plus you always, it always helps to have a British guy on the podcast as he is. He's from the UK. And you can get that accent in there too. And people will listen to that any day. Dan is great. And then my next friend on the podcast too is a guy named Dan Stitzel, who's a tech director around here. They're all amazing. So I'm going to give you a whole list. I'll send it over after we're done.
That was a great bunch of names. Really appreciate that. Just for fun, what are you streaming during your downtime right now? Now you strike me as one of these people who might tell me nothing at all, but I'm curious. Are you locked into a certain show this summer?
We are not huge TV watchers. We try to. We don't find a lot of time to turn the TV on. Right now, the Olympics are on upstairs, and they'll probably be on the TV pretty much constantly for the next 2 weeks. But I always have one show that I'm watching and one show that I'm watching with my wife. The show that I'm watching by myself is Game of Thrones. I never watched it, and so I decided I need to try it. So I'm about maybe 5 episodes in, I think. And then my wife and I are watching The Bear. And I don't understand why I love it, but I love it. It's like nothing's happening, but people are cooking and arguing, and I like it. I don't know what it is. Have you watched that show?
I have only heard about it, have not
Yeah.
seen it. Right now, I'm locked into Succession. I missed out on that one, so that's been fun with me and Mrs. Cavey over here. Jake, what a fun conversation. I'd love to go for another hour, but I know your time is precious. What are the best ways for the Teachers on Fire listening to follow you and connect with Duct Tape this season?
Yeah, so I'm on all social media at Jake Miller EDU. So go wherever you're at Jake Miller EDU. Check out that educational duct tape podcast. And if you're an email person, check out subscribe to my newsletter on my website, which is jakemiller.net, and then you'll get updates when the podcast comes out and all that kind of stuff there.
Sounds good, Jake. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you again for sharing your time with the podcast today. You know, coming to the show from the Eastern time zone, it's not quite as convenient on a Saturday. And I know you take your husband and father duties very seriously. So thank you so much for sacrificing a little bit of your weekend to share with the Teachers on Fire listening this weekend. Teachers on Fire, I'm your host, Tim Cavey. So grateful that you too decided to spend some of your day listening to this podcast. I hope that in some way the content you heard today from Jake Miller sparked your thinking and ignited your practice. And I'll meet you next week right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
You can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, go.